Good afternoon, and welcome to the Voice of Wisdom. With over 60 years of experience as an investment banker, entrepreneur, investment analyst, economist, and venture capitalist, Morty Davis is Wall Street and capitalism personified. The over 400 companies for which he has raised more than $3 billion over the years have created a countless number of jobs and exciting new products. Through the Voice of Wisdom, Mr. Davis explores, analyzes, and debates the most topical, political, economic, and social issues facing our world today. Joining Mr. Davis today for a continued discussion on the state of our union, is Yoni Cohen. Yoni is currently a third-year medical student interested in contributing to public health policy and education in the future. He has a degree in biology from Yeshiva University and has conducted medical research at various institutions, including Yale Medical School and Mount Sinai. And now, Mr. Davis and Mr. Cohen.
Welcome again to my precious listeners who I find are especially brilliant based on the notes I get from them. So when it's Wednesday, 6:30, and I'm back on my podcast with you all, and I enjoy my visit with you because you are all terrific. And I'm delighted that Yoni Cohen is joining me today. He's likewise a very special human being, a special, brilliant, advanced medical student. He's going to be a great doctor. What's your specialty going to be? Do you know yet?
See, I'll keep you posted.
You don't want to tell the audience?
No, it's top secret, classified.
Go for pediatrics, then you don't have to be so secretive. Anyway, I told you I'm working on the most exciting deal I ever worked on in my whole career, or the most exciting deal I ever saw throughout my long life from anybody, which is a cancer cure that looks like it's real, and it's non-invasive, and it's going to change medicine in the world. So I'm so thrilled to be working on it. Anyway, let's continue with last week's discussion that emanated from President Biden's State of the Union message. You felt I think you felt that wasn't a good talk, and I felt it was terrific. So let's talk about our differences. What did you not like about his talk? Because I thought it was really on the ball, and despite his age, and they were always, and Fox and others always Republicans making fun of him, say he's not normal, or he's over the hill, or he's got Alzheimer's or whatever. He came through with flying colors. And by the same token, I thought the Republicans' response was very weak by Huckabee. What's her first name?
Sarah
Huckabee. Her father was former governor of Arkansas, just as Bill Clinton was. And his daughter, the former spokeswoman for Donald Trump, is now governor of Arkansas. But I thought her, if anything, her response to Biden's speech was just, to be kind, stupid. So we'll cover all of that in this session. You want to start off by telling me what your objections were, or what you felt the shortcomings were to Biden's State of the Union message?
Of course. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be back, and looking forward to a great discussion. So just to continue, something we didn't talk about in the last podcast episode was some of the social aspects that President Biden touched on. One thing I found which was very insulting to those of us who didn't vote for President Biden, was he likes to do this from time to time. Instead of being a unifier in chief, he often likes to castigate blame to those who didn't vote for him as somehow being responsible for any kind of violence in the country. Now, he decided that the attack on Paul Pelosi, who lives in San Francisco, Nancy Pelosi's husband, just to bring some facts in for the audience who might not be aware, Paul Pelosi was attacked overnight by a man with a hammer, allegedly. The man broke glass and entered. It's still unclear as to why the man did it. We know that this man was a known, let's just say he had inappropriate tendencies with regards to undressing in public and things of that nature. He was also heavily involved in drug use. No political affiliation. He was, if anything, he needed mental health and he needed help. And the sad part is that this is Nancy Pelosi's district, and there's a lot of homelessness and drug use and different social ills that are plaguing her district that she hasn't addressed at all, and she's not going to. She has her ice cream, she has her mansions, she's fine. She doesn't care about the little guy at all.
And he did say that he was looking for Nancy Pelosi.
We don't know, is that on the body cam footage? We have to listen to the body cam footage and see if that's what he said. Again, there's a lot of conjecture, there's a lot that's not transparent to the public. We know how this attack was catapulted into national news to take advantage of a lot of the political anger against the right that's been fomenting and being fostered by President Biden. This was the perfect opportunity for Nancy Pelosi to claim victimhood, as they always like to do. And I think it's very poor timing on the State of the Union when you're trying to unify the country to then blame those who didn't vote for you as somehow being behind the attack on Paul Pelosi, which I'm pretty sure every Republican condemned. So how would you like to respond to that kind of accusation on President Biden that he's not really a uniter?
I love the way you say she's claiming victimhood when her house was attacked. It's not an accident. That I don't think it was an accident or just random that her house was specifically attacked, and I guess he expected her to be home and wanted to attack her, so he attacked her husband. But you talk about victimhood, that's Donald Trump's number one issue. He's always, every time he's a victim, they're going after him on the Russians, they're impeaching him for no reason. They took away his win. He won overwhelmingly. It's the most votes anybody ever got. As a matter of fact, he was saying, and these are all live statements by him, he says he thinks he's the greatest president ever, maybe George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. No, he thinks he was even better than them. So, but notwithstanding that, he thinks he's such a victim. They robbed him of the presidency. They should take Biden out of the White House and put him in jail. He always said they should put Hillary in jail. So I don't know why you think she's making a terrible claim because she's being victimized, because clearly she was.
Yeah, this reminds me of the way she cries for victimhood, and I'll address the President Trump point hopefully later on. The fact that she cries victimhood was most evident during coronavirus, when we were all locked in our homes, we couldn't go outside, and we couldn't have contact with strangers, and she went to get her hair done at the hair spa, at the hair salon, and then whenever this was exposed on videotape, she cried out that this bleep, and I can't say, set me up, so I can't really, I think that's enough of points about Nancy Pelosi. Just to move on to the other subject of political violence, President Trump's supporters have been pursued in many different areas, so President Trump obviously feels the need to stick up for them, and the fact that he says, I'm better than George Washington, that's part of his style. You know him personally. He is rambunctious, he's like,
right.
He's a lot of bravado, a lot of macho talk, and we can't really take him seriously for that. But I expect career politicians to exercise great restraint. The way they talk is very important, especially on a stage like the State of the Union. Another problem that President Biden has is he seemingly says that African American parents are the only ones who have to teach their kids how to behave when they're stopped by police, and that's not true. I think everybody realizes that they have an obligation to behave a certain way when they're stopped by police. I don't think that this conversation is exclusive to only black parents. I think white parents, Hispanic, Asian, they all have this kind of conversation. So again, he makes race an issue when there's really when it shouldn't be as much of an issue as it is. And this also bleeds into a lot of regulation in diversity areas and equity and inclusion that I think strangle a lot of the young minds that we have in our country who are kind of pushed into different areas because they feel excluded by scholarships that aren't offered to them, by different kind of opportunities. I know in the medical field for us, it's a very big topic that a lot of the scholarships are only, I guess, excluded. They're only limited to certain demographics. So I don't want to go into too much.
I hope I don't sound racist, but I really do feel that is overwhelmingly more important for the black community to teach their children not to be rude, just keep your hands on the wheel and be polite and don't run away, because it happens much more. Maybe they feel justified, maybe they feel there's a reason for them to run away, to have they're taught or brainwashed that the police are terrible. And in some cases, they are.
It's true, there are some cases where
because I
it's
had,
really inexcusable.
in psychology, I had a teacher that taught us about sublimation. So sublimation was a word that is uniquely defined in psychology as substituting good behavior for bad behavior. So one of the extremes, for example, was in the Catholic Church, they don't allow, it's not acceptable to watch pornography, right? So they send a given priest to watch the movies beforehand so they can report back and say,
kosher or not kosher.
Yeah. So that's sublimation. You're doing something that's not good, but for a good purpose. It's not like, and why that guy had to sit there to watch the movie 3 times. That's hard to understand.
You missed some parts, you have to
Right.
rewatch it.
Or people being cops, or some of them have violent natures growing up. They even, some of them have beat up kids when they were young, well, bullies, and then they sublimate and they go into police work and they're doing good work. So they're taking something that's societally wrong and hostile and terrible, and they're using that urge to attack people in a good way. And if there's a criminal that's shooting at them or attacking somebody, they're allowed to do it, and that's sublimation, because they're doing something that ordinarily would be considered terrible. They do it good. So, number one, in general, police are overwhelmingly important to protect people. That's what they're there for. Are there people that still retain the initial hostility, the initial bulliness? Yes. And so it comes out sometimes. But I have to tell you, years ago on ABC, they had a program on the status of, many years ago, it's at least 40, 50 years ago, on the status of at that time they called them the blacks or the coloreds or most of these people were never in Africa, the African Americans. But it evolved over time. When I was young, they said call them Negroes instead of niggers. So this was a program about the status at that juncture. And they had four people on that was all along were saying we need more food stamps, we need more welfare, we need more subsidies, we need more affirmative action. One of them, the fifth one, was a professor from the University of UCLA, I think, University of California, Los Angeles. And he's saying we need to teach our people to stay married, to stay together, to stay home with their kids at night and read to them like some white people do, and many white people do. And it's very important that we spend time with our kids and teach them. And so the average white kid, by the time he goes to first grade, often reads, has certainly been read to overwhelmingly. There's whites that are, that are
There are
not,
poor white neighborhoods too.
right, hardly perfect, but it's overwhelmingly a problem. As a matter of fact, some years ago, you're too young to remember, they brought up in New York, I think it was, or maybe in other states as well, that if a woman had, 6 kids or something, and was neglecting her kids, they want to take them away and put them up for adoption or put them in homes because they're neglecting them, they're running around nights and leaving them home alone, and the youngest is 1.5 or something. And so they introduced a bill that said we'll give people, trying to get those people particularly, we'll give them $50,000 or something, I don't remember the exact amount, to cut their tubes, to tie up their tubes. And it was unbelievable, that the response was, it's genocide, it's this, it's that, and it was dropped immediately because it was. And then the other fellow that said it, unfortunately, he's developed a terrible reputation since, but he was the #1 black actor on television. What was his name? He's just been sent to jail, or I don't know if he's gone to jail yet. His name was Cosby. Bill Cosby? Bill Cosby said the same thing. He said, we have to tell our people to take care of the kids, to stay married, because I think about maybe 80% of them are brought up fatherless. They have fathers, but they're brought up fatherless. There's one guy in the National Football League, good guy, a good player, all around, charming guy, but he has 9 kids with 8 different women, and I think he's married to 1 maybe. So, those kids are you're not telling them, when you're urging mothers to do that for their kids or fathers to do that for their kids, you're not doing anything bad. So why are they? You mean well, and they should. I would tell my kids, if a cop stops you, don't get angry. Don't get, I get angry sometimes, but a friend of mine was driving along and he got stopped by a cop in Brooklyn near Eastern Parkway on Bedford Avenue, and the cop stopped him and said he passed a light and was speeding. And he said, I got to go back, give me your license, your registration. He took it and he went back to his car. He said, I got to go get my summons book. I'm going to give you a ticket. And meanwhile, when he came back, before he wrote the ticket, he listened that the window was open, and my friends, he happened to be in the school system, a teacher, and his wife is screaming at him, "You idiot, you moron, I told you all along, slow down, I told you to." She kept, attacking him and abusing him. Finally, maybe there was a method to the madness, but she was really serious about it because she was PO'd that they were stopped and so forth. And the cop finally said to him, "Look, you got enough troubles. I'm not going to give you a ticket." So, it's wrong to be aggressive against somebody who's presumably working for the good of the community. But if he's a bad guy, don't incite him.
I agree. There are bad apples in every profession.
So I don't know why that upsets you.
Well, it upsets me when you say that the reason why someone is targeted is because of race, when that's not why they're targeted. Like you said yourself, they could be targeted because the officer has a behavioral issue with himself, or they could be targeted because we actually don't have the full story,
but they have to.
and there's something going on between the two. There was like some kind of warrant, criminal crime
but
happening, etc. What we see is that race is not really a factor.
It's reasonable to target those who are suffering the most from it, or who are accused.
But let's not make it a race factor. And the reason why I'm so pushing heavily on
But
this
it's a
point.
race factor.
Well, race
because
is
it's
usually not a factor.
overwhelmingly
The
no, it's
Democratic Party says it's a factor.
It's overwhelmingly true, and if the Democrats object to that, I disagree with them. It's overwhelmingly true that far more black kids are black victims of this by police
Of
than,
shootings
than
or
of
being
the white.
stopped? Because being stopped, that's true,
Both.
they are.
And of shootings.
Shootings, it's not, no, I can pull you the Washington Post statistics, and it found that between whites and blacks, actually I believe more whites were shot by police officers, which actually makes sense because of the demographically there are more whites than blacks. But I don't think it's,
more was shot by
I believe so.
no by
Police.
by police in traffic stops. I don't believe
I have to
that.
check that,
I
but
don't believe that.
overall.
No, but in traffic stops, you're telling your kids, and you should tell your kids, if a cop stops you, don't get hostile, don't get belligerent, just whatever he wants, do it in.
I agree.
So
At the end of the day,
don't incite them, because some of them are, I'm telling you.
yeah, each one will react differently. Some will
Some
take
of
the
them were
temperature up,
bullies.
some will
Some
lower
were
it.
bullies were kids, and they became cops
But then
because they want
it's
to.
not at that point, it's not a race thing. And again, the reason why I think it's so important to do this is
No, but
because
it's
this is
overwhelmingly.
the officer is not targeting the person in the car. Sometimes he doesn't even know who's in the car and what color is being pulled over. What color driver is it that he's pulling over? But I think this is so important because this is fundamentally the Democratic Party's vision for America, is to make everything about race and to interject it into all facets of American life. And as a medical student, I feel this very strongly, and it's happening in many industries as well. So when we talk about regulation, there's 50 ways government works for us. And I looked over the list, and it's actually a very well put together list that I would agree with many of the regulations on. However, diversity regulation, equity regulation, inclusion regulation, all that does is strangle businesses, it strangles employment opportunities, and it doesn't make them equal, it makes them equitable, which is a totally different word than the word equal.
Could you be more specific? Because I don't know, unless you give me some examples, I don't know what exactly
So definitely,
you're referring to.
of course, so definitely medical schools will recruit, they have a certain quota they want to fill with so-called underrepresented minorities, and I agree they are underrepresented, but I don't think it's fair to give someone a leg up over somebody else. I don't think it's fair to give a certain race or color.
So you're not in favor of affirmative action?
I'm not in favor of affirmative action.
Okay.
No, yeah, that's a good topic to talk about as well.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a good example of government regulation. I think it's done more harm. It may have started out with good intentions, but I think the way to lift everybody up is to, like you said, improve the family structure, improve public school system. There's many other ways that we can improve it instead of just giving a free pass to people to come in and lowering the quality overall.
I share that with you because now at Harvard, they're taking in far more Asians than they are blacks. And some of the Asians that are very qualified are being rejected because they have affirmative action that they have to let in less qualified people. So there may be other ways to do it. When I was at Harvard Business School, we dropped out, or you were told the first day, that 10% of the class is going to get flunked out. And I thought, well, if somebody's a big shot, comes from a big family, that won't happen to them. And they really lived up to it, because one of the guys in my section, there were 570 students, my section had 90. Each class had 90. There was a guy named Mac Aldrich, and his family, on the campus of Harvard Business School, there were 3 dormitories right opposite the library on the main campus. And all the dormitories were named after former secretaries of treasuries of the United States. So one of them was Morgan Hall, famous Morgan, J.P. Morgan. The second one was Mellon Hall. There's a big family, Mellon.
Carnegie Mellon?
Carnegie Mellon, yeah. And the third one was Aldrich Hall. And unbelievably to me, Mac Aldrich was flunked out. I even had lunch with him after I graduated, and he was still devastated. It's not that he had any trouble financially or didn't have a job, because the family had a big Wall Street firm of their own even then, but he was devastated. So then, 25 years later, it so happens one of my classmates became the dean of the Harvard Business School, and I asked him, just out of curiosity, are they still dropping out 10% of the class? And he says, no, we can't do that anymore. He says, because first of all, when you were in a class, in my recollection, we didn't have one African American or black. Somebody said we did have one. I never met him, I never saw him. But overwhelmingly, we had no blacks. In fact, we had no women.
How about Jewish? Were they accepting Jews more or less,
Well,
or not as much anymore?
I was Jewish, so I can't say.
Yes.
I can't say, but we had I don't
Because
know.
I know at one point it was even close to Jews as well.
Oh, many years ago, maybe. But I went in 57, so a lot of people ask me, that's surprising that you got in, that you went. But I didn't find any of that. Maybe, I don't know, they have quotas. He said, as a matter of fact, one of the things he said is he's spending a lot more time in court than he ever did. Than historically the dean would spend. And I said, why is that? He says, because, for example, a woman is suing me because her daughter from New York, her daughter is a straight A student, summa cum laude. She's president of the class and she's captain of the tennis team, and she gets rejected. So how could that be? You can't be better than that. And he explained to her, which is interesting. He said, we get too many applicants from New York and from Boston. So we get people of that quality that we have to reject. If you're from Afghanistan, there's a high probability you'll get in, because they want to keep it diverse. Or if you're from Mississippi, maybe they get less applicants. That's not necessarily a great excuse, but that's what they do. But anyway, affirmative action.
To be clear, I want minorities, I want other races, whoever it is, to be present and be in the class. I do want them to be able to serve their communities. I want there to be representation from as many different areas as possible, because it does strengthen the profession. But I don't want it to come at the expense of other students. It needs to be a fair process.
Not only that, they want the African Americans want reparations.
That's something the Democratic Party are pushing.
They should be so thankful that their grandparents, their predecessors, were brought to America, even under slavery, because there's no people in Africa, except the guys that are running the countries and get subsidized by other wealthier countries that are wealthy, that live as good a life as the average African American in this country. As a matter of fact, the average African American in this country, and almost all, live a better life than any king up to 100 years ago, 200 years ago.
I think that would be anyone
Did you
of
know
us.
that?
All
Yes.
of us. Here we all live better.
No, but I'm saying the lowest of the low, it's, there's
Economically,
poverty
right.
and there's some that were deprived of, their kids are deprived of adequate food. So
those are exactly things I think need to be addressed.
and
Strengthening
the
their communities is the best way to do
Democrats
it.
are in favor of that. The Republicans are against
Against which one?
all welfare, all food stamps.
So welfare and food stamps are much different
What are they
than-
advocating to balance the budget?
Yeah.
To, change Social Security, privatize
So we
Social
know
Security,
ourselves from the Jewish
and
tradition.
to get rid of Medicare. Do you know how many years they're fighting to get rid of Medicare? It was only saved by John McCain, who came and voted at the last minute against, as a Republican, against eliminating Medicare.
Well, we know from our tradition that if you teach someone to fish, it's much more valuable than giving them fish. So putting welfare, putting these different kind of government initiatives, I think do much more harm. They grow dependency on the government.
We taught a guy to fish and he refuses to go to work. He loves fishing.
You're
No, they said if you give him in to fish, you feed him for one day. If you teach him to fish, you can feed he can feed himself for a lifetime. So that
there's actually a big problem with people not wanting to return to work.
So what has that got? Yeah, look.
So because of COVID, but
you know something. There's a lot of that, but it's infinitesimal in terms of the total, and you don't forego the good for the perfect. So we have to recognize that there's much more big tax cheats than there are guys that are collecting a lot of money illegally.
Yeah, I'm not worried about someone getting rich off of food stamps. That's not the issue. The issue, I think, is that it creates a bad precedent and it puts people in a cycle of poverty that they then can't break out of. And then telling somebody who's gone to a failing school system, who's been who's been in a violent neighborhood, who's had a bad family structure, that yeah, you can join Harvard and we'll put you in the class, but you're really not kind of qualified to be there. I think that sends the wrong message. It puts the student at a very, he has a hard time in the school itself. And school is not easy for anybody, no matter which type of graduate school you go to, they're all tough.
Yeah.
So I think someone needs to have a good background in their regular schooling. Their public schools need to be strong. And I was a tutor in one of the public schools on Manhattan. I don't want to say exactly where, but it was in a low-income neighborhood. And the school itself needs support. They need they need good parenting, they need good teachers, they need the administration that's buying in and that's working with the students. And there was a high level of inattentiveness, absentee, violence, things like that. And it's not, just to be clear, this isn't the same thing as you mentioned in your book, Hard Knocks to Hot Stocks, that you had a hard time in school. It's not that kind of environment anymore. It's much more different. Where kids,
that was made that hard.
Yeah.
Oh no, and
I
the
think
nature,
it's much worse nowadays.
the nature of the rabbis at that time.
But I
They
think
were
it's
newly
much worse.
arrived. There was 25% unemployment. It was a very different world. So they took out their frustrations and it was in Europe where they came from. Beating up kids to make them better was
Standard
the
practice.
nature. Yeah, the nature of the.
Yeah. Thank God we don't do that anymore in the classroom. But I think there are these schools that in these democratic strongholds still have a long way to go. And I think taking care of that would fix a lot of the issues more than complaining about vague representations of like race and all these other catch-all terms that the Biden administration likes to throw out. It doesn't really help the issue. So I think in the State of the Union...
Like what does he throw out?
Well, he says race, he says we need to have more diversity, he says we need to have things like the transgender agenda. I don't want to get into it too much if you don't want to, but because it might be taken down off of YouTube. But then these are areas that the education of our children is directly being affected by these kind of new age ideas that we never heard of before.
Listen, I had that problem years ago for some freaky reason. Because I dropped out, I rebelled against my education because I kept getting beat up and everything. I was tortured. 5 years old, I was getting beat up already in my first class. So I dropped out early. I was 14, I dropped out of school. The only thing that remained from me, and it's stressed in the Jewish religion, as you know, was the respect for learning. So once I dropped out, after a year of sort of bumming around, every morning I went to, I took money out of deposit bottles and some money I took out of my mother's pocketbook, not that she had a lot of money, but in those days it was a lot of money, but I think for 10 cents I went to 42nd Street. There were 3 theaters there, movie theaters, that showed a new movie and had a live show. So I saw Frank Sinatra, I saw Bing Crosby, I saw all of the greatest vaudeville people and actors and actresses. So I used to go almost every morning, but at least twice a week. But after a year, I decided I should go back to school. So I went back to night school, and the night school I went to was in a bad neighborhood in Brooklyn, bed-sized Bed-Stuy section.
Still in that
Brooklyn.
neighborhood. Still rough.
Still rough?
Yeah.
But when I went, I didn't even know, because hardly any kids dropped out of school in those days, to my knowledge. So they said some of those girls were already juvenile delinquents, some of them were prostitutes. I didn't even know what that word meant. It was too big a word for me to understand. And some of the guys, it was mostly African Americans. They didn't call them that in those days. Black classmates I had, because less whites dropped out than blacks. So the name of the school I went to was Central Girls High. During the daytime, it was a very good girls' high school. At night, it was co-ed. So when I graduated, my diploma said Central Girls High School, and it said my name, Morty Davis, and diploma and so forth. And I used to hang it up. And my daughter's friends used to say, how did your father go
To the girls'
to
school.
Central Girls High? Is he a transvestite? They didn't even, nobody used the word transvestite in those days. But on the other hand, Jackie Mason always said, which is true, he said the advantage of being bisexual is you double your chances for a date on Saturday night. Anyway, I'm not suggesting anybody will become bi.
Not advised. Don't try this at home.
So,
Those are just two examples of what I think on the social aspect that President Biden, again, failed to deliver as a so-called unifier in chief. But then there's other things we can talk about as well that I think he didn't do such a great job of. And I think some of the events that this week
no,
we're
but
now seeing.
he focuses on dealing with the problems of the African American community, which is much more.
They're also divided on this issue
which
as
is
well.
much more.
They don't all
but
think like the.
It may be
President
divided,
Biden.
and certainly divided, but it's much less divided than on the Republican side.
I think the
Well,
Republicans.
why do you think that the African Americans vote so overwhelmingly for the Democrats?
So this is I think we have to go back in history to the early 1900s. This is after the Civil War, after kind of the sharecroppers came in, and African American families were very much together. There was a father, there was a mother. They were very involved in their children's lives, because they were normal parents. With a lot of the industrialization that happened in the 1900s, a lot of African American families picked up from the South and they moved into the
I think
cities.
you're being unrealistic, because in slavery they separated. They bought the
This is
mother.
after
They
slavery.
bought the.
This is after. I'm talking about in the sharecropper era, the 60s.
Yeah,
The 60s was the Civil War.
But the
We
Civil
had the
War was
70s,
only
the 80s, the 90s.
1865 was the end of the Civil War,
And the
and you're saying
Reconstruction
in
era.
1900 it didn't change
So you think
so
that
dramatically.
you think that African American families were doomed to failure since the
What-
Civil War?
They were separated.
I don't know if it's fair to say that they were doomed to failure after the Civil War until today.
I
That's
didn't
not a
say
very
they're
fair-
doomed to failure. I said the failure
It's true, the
emanated.
families were separated.
I said they were doomed to failure as a result of the consequences of this living a life of.
So
And not only
no,
that.
it's true that the,
No, not only that. 50 years when I was younger, maybe 30%. You have to check this. Len, when you get a chance, check this. But about 30% maybe of the African American kids were born out of wedlock.
do we know what the percentage is now? Because
It's
probably,
like about 70% or something.
Yeah, so I agree. There was a lot that wasn't in their favor after the Civil War. I mean, the Civil Rights Act took a long time to actually come into effect, and that definitely stunted a lot of their progress in many different areas. Like, thank God now everything is fixed. But I think that the actual family structure has been weakened severely because since they moved after industrialization, they moved into the cities. And if you remember at the time, there was New York City was heavily corrupt, boss tweed, all these corrupt politics. People began to recognize, the Democratic Party specifically began to recognize that there's this large bastion of support that if we make them dependent on us for everything from food stamps to school programs to the promise of safety, which is really an illusion because we see that the cities are not safe at all, then we can collect these votes year after year after year in every election cycle, and they won't really know an alternative. And that's why we see that in so-called liberal cities like New York, the Republicans are basically non-existent. They don't have effective messaging because they're not even effective at governing in these areas. There's really barely any alternative to the liberal agenda because the liberals are in charge of the education department, they're in charge of the mayor's office, they're in charge of the state usually as well, like New York State. And so it's very hard to blame Republicans for not being able to serve the needs of the liberal demographics of African Americans because the Republicans often don't even have a chance in those areas. You have to be willing to give the other side a chance if you want to maybe see what they have to say and if you want to improve in that area. So if the community in New York City, for example, because that's local to some of our areas where I'm from New York City. So if we look at how they vote, they often vote, and this is not only African Americans, this is in general the population of New York City, votes directly for the liberals or for the Democrats. They don't even give the Republicans a chance. If they were to give the Republicans a chance in one election cycle, let's see, maybe the Republicans could fix some of the problems, but that hasn't happened. We're still waiting for an election cycle where we get to see some
Look,
kind of...
I have to tell you, people don't realize, I don't think they realize how much progress the African Americans have made. First of all, we had an African American president. We still haven't had a woman as president. We have now the head of the army is African American. I still slip and I say black, but I have to tell you, I had a friend. He said his son applied to Harvard, and they were from South Africa, and he wrote that he's African American, and they called him down for an interview. They wanted to take him in, and then the guy was fuming at him. How come you try to get an advantage by saying you're African American? And he said, well, I'm far more African American than all the people that have never been to Africa. I wasn't trying to get, that's my background.
I think the fact that President Obama was elected and that Lloyd Austin is the defense minister.
Wait, that's just the beginning.
Secretary of Defense.
Wait, the vice president is now black.
So how come Biden keeps saying that we're racist?
The mayor,
how come he keeps casting aspersions over half the country?
The mayor of New York is black. The attorney general of New York is black.
Mm-hmm.
The head of the Democratic, who would be Speaker of the House if they were in majority, Jeffries, is black.
Yeah, there are also plenty of Republicans who are black in local and state offices. We just don't hear about them because the media doesn't want to talk about them.
There aren't plenty. There are very few. So don't. There are some, but there are very few.
So this also leads to another part that I don't like about President Biden's State of the Union is that he consistently touts that we're making progress in different areas and we're going to do a great job in areas like transportation. But you look at the kind of appointments he makes, and he makes appointments based on certain qualifications. If you check certain boxes, then you get to be put in office. So why was Kamala Harris chosen? She was chosen because she's black, and that's pretty much why she got the job. There's many other qualified African Americans who could serve as vice president, male and female. They would do a terrific job, but President Biden decided to settle on her.
Well,
okay, that's fine.
Let's be real. Politics dictates a lot of behavior.
But
and to get elected, he had to pick a black vice president. I don't know if she's the right one. I'm not impressed with her at all.
no, not at all. We agree.
All she ever does is giggles. I don't think she's made any big impression on any issue so far. So, but that was a prerequisite for, he would have never got elected because South Carolina got him elected because he was way behind, and then he won overwhelmingly in South Carolina at the instance of, who's the senator, the black senator or congressman from South Carolina?
Republican or Democrat?
Democrat.
Well, there's Republican in North Carolina.
Democrat.
Democrat.
And he told them, you gotta pick a black.
The Republicans are guilty of this too. They're guilty of this too.
No, so I said politics.
They
Politics dictates. So,
Yeah.
You
But
know,
I think you
we're
should
not
choose
gonna-
the most
so
competent
far,
person for the job.
I agree that,
And especially in areas like transportation, we have a transportation secretary named Peter Buttigieg, and he is wholly incompetent at what he does. There was, I'm sure you heard this week, a train derailment in Ohio, in East Palestine, that sent a huge plume of smoke into the air, and in a controlled explosion that released tons of chemicals throughout the area.
Oh my God,
Of course,
they'll blame it on the Israelis, because it's Palestine.
I saw a thing, it's like Ilhan Omar stopped caring about East Palestine when she realized it's not in Israel. So, unfortunately, yeah, a lot of people are being impacted by this. It's an environmental disaster, and it's getting very little attention in the media, of course, and because it happens to be that the demographics of East Palestine are not favorable to the media's coverage, so we're not gonna, it's generally a
You
low.
know, just as an aside, we're talking about Palestine. That's not the subject. But, overwhelmingly, the most anti-Jewish or pro-Palestinian individuals in the United States are Jewish, young Jewish college students. And even a lot of American secular Jews are certainly, and it's because of Jewish, because the Jews always identify with the
The underdog.
underdog, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but we're even the United States government is critical of the Thomas Friedman, who's Jewish, wrote an article that was very critical of the new government of Israel.
He happens to be a big Bibi hater.
Yeah.
I take everything he says
That's
with a big grain of salt.
that's what the article was about the right-wing, terrible right-wing government that they have now. And he wrote to
Democratically elected, I would add.
he wrote Biden a note asking him what does he feel about this new administration and about Israel, and Biden wrote back, that it's very important to have democracy and carry out the activities or the behavior of democracy.
What if the
And
will
the
of the people-
implication,
Yeah.
no, the implication was Bibi Netanyahu is now trying to change the Supreme Court, which has been very left-wing in Israel, and they act against, often in the interest of Palestinian interests, against Israeli interests. So what he wants to do, interestingly enough, is have, now the Supreme Court justices there are appointed by a non-partisan group, by a committee. And Bibi wants to have the government appoint them, which is what we have in our government. The president appoints and they're making it out to be they're accusing him of wanting to do that so he could get off his own indictment. And there's a Jewish general that used to be part of his cabinet and has brought the indictment against Bibi and is so strong against what he wants to do. He criticizes him. But I want to point out one thing. Often the United States even is critical, and the world is critical, that Israel's occupying, what do they call it? Occupied
territories.
Occupied territory. Well, if they're occupying it, then it's occupied territory. But there's no more occupied territory without justice than we who live here in the United States, because we took it away from the Indians. We had no prior claim. At least the Israelis lived there and claimed they were there before and so forth. So, but everything that
It's rich,
the United
yes,
States,
yes.
but they said there were
That they
different
do.
values in those old days, but it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you something else. There was a great rabbi, what was his name? I tried to tell you last time. I'm terrible on names. Anyway, he was a rabbi, a lawyer. He was a professor at Yeshiva University. And at that time, there was a great rebellion against by Barakan and some of the other leaders of the black community against Jews. And he pointed out that the Jews were the ones that founded the NAACP, all Jewish names.
Jews were heavily involved in the civil rights movement
Right,
in the
and
1960s.
two of three guys, Schwärmer and I used to know
In
their name.
Mississippi, they were
Yeah.
killed by the Ku Klux
Two
Klan.
out of the three were Jewish that were killed by the. So he said, he even said, why are they angry at us? We haven't done anything for them lately. And he also pointed out that you always bite the hand that feeds you, you know? But it doesn't matter that we, you know.
That ties into a lot of the underpinnings of the extreme part of the Democratic Party, which I don't think President Biden is entirely on board with, but he does have these kind of extremists in his rank, and I think they also foster a lot of the political violence we see nowadays from the left. Is this idea that there are certain classes of races and people who are more marginalized and more afflicted than others and more oppressed than others. And when the Jews started to achieve some kind of political influence and they became a little bit more successful and economically wealthier in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, etc., from the early days when you were growing up, they began to see the Jews as kind of the dominant party oppressing more marginalized communities. And that's where a lot of the hatred stems. So I think it's a very toxic belief that one race is responsible for your failures and one group is responsible for you. I think your book illustrates so well that with hard work and with determination and drive, you can achieve great things, and there's very little obstacles that you really face in life. There's just one thing I think the Democratic Party needs to address, because it does foster this idea that everything is against you, everybody's working against you, and you have a lot of, all these obstacles are thrown up in front of you, and we have to take money away from this person to give it to that person. Again, there's a lot of regulation, that's good, I agree, we can talk about that again in the future, but race-based regulation.
It's not taking money away from.
Reparations.
I was
Reparations
very
would take money away from us.
I was doing
you and
very
everyone else.
well. I was making a lot of money, and I wanted the government to raise my taxes, even though I hated paying taxes, because I wanted to be a better country, and we should think of a country, of our country, as a family. And if somebody's not doing well, it makes the country better if everybody's doing well and everybody's.
I agree.
The wealthiest people, that if they keep getting more and more, it'll be the same as what happened, I think I mentioned that last time, in France, because the revolution, the French Revolution came about because the wealthy had all the money and the poor had nothing. They told Marie Antoinette,
let them eat cake.
yeah, they don't have bread, so she said, let them eat cake. So that was then she didn't even have a chance to eat more cake. So they're stupid for insisting that they should get more and more and more, and the income inequality is one of the greatest issues in my mind that has to be straightened out more, because when I was younger, the average chief executive salary was about maybe 10 or 15 times the most of what the average blue-collar worker was making in the good jobs, in the auto companies where they had lifetime jobs. And today, it's like 300 times or more, It's outrageous.
So do you think it's because the company got so big, it began swallowing up its competitors? How did that happen, where the CEOs all of a sudden came to that position?
Well,
what did they do?
A few things happened. First of all, in those days, about 30% or 35% of Americans were unionized. Today it's down to about, I don't know if it's 5 or 7%. So the unions don't have no power. So the owners and the shareholders have all the power, and the workers have very little power. And when you bring up the issue that the corporations have an obligation to more than just their shareholders, to the local community, to the employees and so forth, they say no. Milton Friedman said the only obligation of the company is to take care of its shareholders and to maximize profits. And that's terrible. That shouldn't be the only, because it didn't say life, liberty, and maximizing profits or maximizing GDP. It's a life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And not only that, giving is even, I think it's the New Testament said, it's better to give than to receive. That's why I'm always willing to receive. I'm willing to take the worst part. If I wasn't willing to receive, they couldn't get the better part to get. But I'm saying, so these rich guys that make all this money, they should, even, I told you last time, I think, Warren Buffett said, it's outrageous that I pay a lower income tax than my secretary, or that Biden announced in the State of the Union that there's 40 companies, I think, or I forget how many companies, that made $40 billion and didn't pay a penny of taxes.
So do you think this could all be solved by unions, or is there something
No,
else that
it
could
could be solved by government regulations, because they finally did something, very little, did something, just as they claim, oh, we did something with gun control. That we see how much it helped yesterday. Another shoot, did you know there was
Yeah,
another?
do you know that the guy had 2 prior gun crimes? He had a soft on crime prosecutor who took his felony down to misdemeanor.
There's no way there should be so many guns available. There's a lot of, every other country has a lot of nuts, just as we do.
Let's talk about
A lot of
Switzerland.
crazy
Switzerland
guns.
has guns. They don't have this. They don't have this issue. The police were called to this man.
I
They
don't
were made
know.
aware
I
of this.
I never
you about
studied
this.
Switzerland.
I can tell you about
But
this man
there's
from yesterday.
hardly
this
any
killer.
other country,
I
no
shouldn't
other
even- I shouldn't
country,
even call him a man. He's
no
a
other,
killer.
no other,
This killer.
no other country comes close to the United States in the number of these mass killings. No other country. And the other countries that had the experience, like Australia, New Zealand, and right away they changed the laws, and they don't. I think I mentioned last time, Australia hasn't had one since they just this year, or last year, had the first one since 1994.
We should talk about Israel's gun control. Israel has some of the toughest gun control. The citizens are limited to 1 pistol and 50 bullets. And that's if you pass the rigorous live fire training, psychological exam, interview exam. And yet we see Arabs who are Israeli citizens, they're not Palestinian, so-called Palestinians in their villages who acquire, arms across the border. They're Arab Israeli citizens of Israel who acquire illegal weaponry, rifles with scopes, optics. They have submachine guns. They have large magazines, large caliber rounds, 7.62, 5.56, and they're able to wreak havoc.
On what basis do they acquire it?
Illegally.
What's their claim?
Illegally.
Illegally.
On the black market.
Yes, I'm saying.
So what we see is that
No,
someone
so
who is
what-
determined
so
can
why-
acquire weapons, whether it's legal, illegal, black market.
Who's providing them?
We can. Well, they come
The
from.
United States
No,
or
they come
Israel?
from. They come from Jordan. They come from Lebanon.
Yeah, so-
They come from the Arab territories.
So they have to stop that. They have to.
But we see that no matter, even with such regulation placed on the average citizen, the criminal, the terrorist, the psychopath can acquire whatever weapons he wishes.
Boom. In Australia, they found that it didn't happen. In New Zealand, it didn't
If
happen.
someone wants to commit a crime in Australia, can he acquire a weapon?
No.
So you're saying, so according to your
Unless he
logic-
goes in and says, I want to commit a crime, could you let me have a weapon? At least
we're going to agree to disagree.
they want
We're gonna agree to
honesty.
disagree.
No,
We're going to agree to disagree.
you look at the rest of the world, they all have the same young people with the same problems and suicides. We have the most
I
suicides.
think Japan has the most.
Okay.
We have the most with firearms.
Yeah, but
It's
they-
like if everyone had a pool.
just 1 second.
Mhm.
When they try to commit any other way, they only succeed 10% of the time. 90% of the suicides in this country are with firearms, with guns.
Yes.
So if they weren't laying around, if they weren't accessible, let's stop it. Let's do what Australia did. There's a role model, what you could do to stop it. They won't stop it.
We should follow
there's-
Nazi Germany.
you know,
Nazi
there's-
Germany banned weapons. We
there's-
should follow them.
No,
They set the
no.
model for the whole world.
That's for a different reason. They didn't want anybody to have the ability to attack the.
So you're proving my point. That's why we have something called the Second Amendment.
That's bullshit because if
Why
if-
did Nazi
if
Germany
they
ban firearms?
if they attack now with guns in Washington, the military has airplanes and
But why should they attack the government? What did the government do?
that's no. You say if they want They want to overthrow the government.
No, I didn't say overthrow.
You said for
You said
the
You said the Nazis,
'cause they don't
didn't
want-
want anyone
'cause-
to stop them from committing genocide.
They didn't want anybody to have the ability to
stop.
overthrow Hitler.
And they also extended that
That was
policy to
Hitler's
Poland.
policy, but
No,
that-
but they extended that policy to Poland. They extended it to all the
Yeah.
occupied territories.
Anybody that
because they didn't want anyone to get
anybody
away
that
with
could
genocide.
be anybody that could be against Hitler.
That's not what the
They
law
didn't
said.
care
I can
about-
show you what they said in
They
the
didn't-
Reichstag.
They didn't care about the average citizen and didn't have a gun and didn't get a gun because of the that's nonsense.
No, I can show you the law in the Reichstag. When they passed the law in the Reichstag, they specifically said, and this was echoed by, I believe, Himmler
What did it say?
or Goebbels.
What did it
They
say?
said that no Jew shall have access to a weapon, etc. And ultimately, I don't know if this was written in Mein Kampf or in a different book.
No Jew or no citizen?
No, this was Jew.
Nobody.
Jew.
Oh,
Jew. So because they didn't want the Jews to
Well,
get away with genocide.
but that we
It's
know.
not. It wasn't because they were scared
That
of
we
someone
know.
overthrowing
That we
Hitler.
know.
They weren't scared of
They didn't
someone.
want the Jews to have anything. They didn't let them have businesses.
Yeah.
They didn't.
So it becomes very
that
dangerous
doesn't
when
surprise.
it becomes
That doesn't
dangerous.
surprise me.
So it
But
becomes
that
dangerous.
people were not allowed to have guns if they were.
It's just a very dangerous
and
path
with
when the government restricts firearms from
with
the
Israel, you
citizens.
have to realize the world doesn't realize they have different values. Israel is the first country that sends out whenever there's a disaster. Now in Turkey and
Syria.
Syria, Turkey is no lover of Israel, and they've been anti-Israel a lot. And Syria certainly is not. And they're sending right away people. The other day they said some Israelis got a kid out after 5 days.
It's incredible that he was able to survive.
They got one out today
Yeah,
for
yeah.
two people out for 8 days.
Crazy.
I don't know. Maybe soon they'll be able to do what a bear's.
Hibernation.
Yeah, the scientists are trying to figure out how do they go
Survive without
6
food
months
and water.
without. So now it's showing 8 days. Maybe they'll find out how we could do that. Without food, without water. It's a
It'll
miracle.
be interesting to see.
What else was I going to
But
tell
we're saying
you?
how Israel's the first. They're a different country. They're really unique.
No, and they're in Ukraine. In Ukraine, they set up. They're not in favor of the war on Ukraine against the Russians, or they're sort of neutral on that subject.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding that, they set up a hospital, they set up
Humanitarian aid.
ambulance and so forth, but nobody gives them credit. So I'm saying, in general, it's just like Israel. My father-in-law used to say, in Ireland, every corner is a pub. In Israel, every corner is a bookstore. It's different values, so you can't. Israel probably has more guns than any, because everybody serves in the military, and when they come out, they don't take away their guns.
No, they do. They do.
They do?
Yeah, they do. Unless you're part of a
Oh.
special response unit in the
So
yeshiv.
So that's
in the
so
settlement.
that's responsible.
You like that approach?
Yes. Yeah.
We'll agree to disagree.
Okay. Once in a while we agree, but we haven't covered anything of what we talked about.
I'll tell you just briefly the topics I had.
Yeah.
I had topics to talk about.
Let it run longer. Well, if people want to turn it off, they can turn it off.
I had topics to talk about. We had decorum and civility versus increased political banter and tension like they do in the parliament in England. We had topics about immigration. What do you think about Biden's handling of the border? Is strong, not strong? He said he wanted to hire more agents to stop the flow of fentanyl.
He also wants to hire more people for the IRS.
He does.
And the Republicans are against that
Yeah, I'm
because
about it, yeah.
there's very little supervision of the top. You got a better chance if you're at the low end
Of being
of being audited, then
That's a big
it's
problem.
unbelievable.
That's a big problem. That needs to
No,
be
so
fixed.
what does it show you about the Republican values? And it's not Republican values,
I don't think we
actually.
need to hire more agents. I think all the agents we have should be taking the attention off of us and directing it off to the big guys.
No, we need more, and also we need more qualified, because even with Trump's, I think what came out afterwards with Trump, he reported so much bull over the years. He took losses. He had made claims about values of his assets.
It's called loopholes. We have to close the loopholes.
Yeah,
If there
but
are
that we
loopholes.
don't. We don't, because it's all because it's not a democracy. It's an autocracy, because, or whatever. What is it called when rich guys run it? Maybe something like
Plutocracy.
Plutocracy. Because the guy who pays the bills, who pays your success, pays your rent, the guys that get him elected, the donors, call the shots, and they're the ones with money. That's why Trump is a hero, because he gave a cut of $1.7 trillion, 80% of which went to the top 10%, and the other 20% went to 80% of the.
So that also leads into another topic I wanted to talk about. Was last time we talked about prescription drug prices. So do price controls help? Are price controls a good thing or a bad thing? Do they stifle innovation, or do they?
We don't have price control.
Well, let's say insulin is capped at $35.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing or not a good thing?
Absolutely. You know why? Insulin is.
And how does that relate to product innovation?
I'm glad you brought up insulin, because insulin is off its patent forever. The guys who invented it sold it to Eli Lilly for $3.
There are three companies that make insulin.
Why did they sell it for $3? Because they wanted the masses to have access to it. Also, Eli Lilly is like a major monopoly. I don't think there's a generic drug out there that's selling, and they pay off the companies that want to go into generics. They buy them out. They include them in their.
So that we see that competition. If
No,
more competition,
but let me tell you
one
one more thing that I heard this morning on television. Coincidentally, it said that Eli Lilly several years ago raised consistently the price to where it was 8 times what it was at the beginning, and it wasn't more. It didn't cost them more to manufacture. It didn't cost. And it's, as I think mentioned to earlier last week, there's in economics there's products that are elastic and inelastic that people buy. Elastic means you have an option, you don't need it, so if the price goes up to. Inelastic is you need it so desperately that the price doesn't stand in your way. You don't buy more if they made it very cheap. People wouldn't buy more insulin because if they don't need it, they wouldn't buy it. So and salt, if you made it much cheaper, they wouldn't buy a lot more salt. But if they need salt, they got to pay for it. So it's inelastic. There's certain oil, gas at the gas station is mostly inelastic, except for people that are just driving for leisure. Maybe they could do without it. But even leisure time is a vital thing. So gas is inelastic, and Saudi Arabia and OPEC takes advantage of that. And in this country, they'd all be in jail. You can't fix the price and fix the supply in this country and not go to jail.
That was another topic as well in the State of the Union.
I'll have to have you back if you could.
We will. We're going to have to do
make it. We got to finish this subject. By the time we finish with the State of the Union,
they'll be up to the next one.
No, we may not have a union because, in every country where the wealth went, so disproportionately to the wealthy, there was an overthrow. That's why the wealthy guys are stupid, because they had the most vested interest in keeping stability and keeping the masses at least relatively happy. And if you have income inequality that keeps growing and growing, you're going to have a French Revolution. But I hope it happens in France, not in the United States.
We don't want that stuff here. Not at all.
All right. We ran out. Unfortunately, I enjoyed our conversation so much, even though you tend to disagree with me. But unlike the politicians or the people who serve us in Congress, we could disagree and agree to disagree. And still, I admire you, and I'm very fond of you.
Likewise.
And you may want to kill me, but if we have a civil conversation, not a civil war. So, God bless you. Thank you, everybody. Let's thank Yoni Cohen for volunteering for this podcast, And I definitely want to get him back again as soon as I can.
Thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, and looking forward to coming back.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.